In this episode of The Bear Roars, Dan chats with Colorado innovator Blake Scholl, the founder and CEO of Boom Supersonic, a company focused on making high-speed, sustainable air travel a reality. With a background in tech and aviation, Scholl founded Boom in 2014 to revive supersonic flight and reduce global travel times. Before Boom, he held leadership roles at Amazon and Groupon and co-founded the mobile startup Chemo Labs. Driven by his passion for innovation, Scholl is leading the development of Overture, the world's fastest and most sustainable supersonic airliner. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
Hey there, Blake. How are you?
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
So you just said something before we started recording about you're living the dream, 80%, and then you said 20%. So what's the 80% and what's the 20% of living the dream?
Well, it's become sort of my standard saying because I think that's just entrepreneur founder life, no matter what. Like on one hand, I get to have, I almost pinch myself. I get to go build supersonic passenger airliners, and it's just like there's nothing else in the world I would rather be doing, and it's in danger of actually working. And that's 80% of it. And then 20% is like, well, what are all the things that could kill us and get in the way of accomplishing that? And and it's every year there's a new thing that crops up that's like, okay, that's the thing we have to go crush.
Yeah, and typically what makes entrepreneurs like you who are doing moonshots successful is you're constantly thinking about those 20% that can be thought of, okay, 80% is going well, but I'm going to spend all my time obsessing about the 20% that could get in the way. Do you find yourself obsessing over that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I spend basically all of my time on what's not going well.
Yeah, you have to.
I think that's otherwise. What was Andy Grove's famous book? Only the Paranoid Survive. It's totally true. I mean, as an example, we hired about a year ago, who's turned out to be an amazing executive to lead our engine development program.
Okay.
And in his onboarding, one of the conversations I had was, I was like, Scott, can you prove to me that your program is not fucked up? And he's a very honest guy, and he said, no. I said, great. So the operating assumption is unless you can prove it's not fucked up, it's fucked up.
And how do you respond? Because most engineers don't like that.
Yeah, he got on the next.
It paralyzes them.
Yeah, I could tell a different story about him that is one of my favorite Scott stories, and in a way answers the question.
Yep.
We were sorry. I think we should set a little bit of context here for the audience.
Oh, we'll get around to the context.
Yeah. So, but there's
they know you're the supersonic airline guy. Well, we'll get to the rest.
Yeah, we're doing supersonic passenger jets, and we made the decision about a couple of years ago to build our own engine.
Yep.
And
you made that decision in some ways because you were having trouble getting the right type of dependable partner to really jump in and do it. Everyone, they tend to be pretty conservative companies.
We sort of thought, the assumption in the industry was only 3 companies in the world know how to build jet engines. You got to get one of those 3 to go work with you.
Yep.
And anything else would be crazy. GE, Rolls-Royce, and Pratt & Whitney.
Yes.
And
so you only have 3 established choices.
That's right. And so I've come to believe that the crazy thing is basically putting all your eggs in the basket of one of those 3 companies.
Yeah.
And that, imagine the success story that is SpaceX if they'd gone out of house for an engine. Like
that's a really good analogy, actually, because SpaceX does most everything themselves, and they just decide to go out and do it. I mean, that's
right.
bold.
They did their own propulsion, and he had a working engine in the time that one of the big guys could maybe have had a meeting about whether they would be interested in building the engine.
Oh, I didn't think of it that way, but that is absolutely
when I see it that way, I'm like, why did I ever think it was reasonable to do it any other way?
Yeah.
So anyway, we took our own engine program in house about 2 years ago. We hired Scott to come in and lead that. And
Scott's background.
Scott was a 39-year Boeing veteran.
Okay.
And he had done propulsion on everything from Joint Strike Fighter through to the 787-9. And he was when we stole him from Boeing, he was re-engineering the B-52, which is like a 70-year-old bomber that they want to keep flying for another 70 years. Mm-hmm. And I was like, Scott, do you want to re-engine a 70-year-old hunk of metal, or do you want to come with us and build the future? And so obviously he came with us to build the future. But we were doing this program review earlier this year. And it sort of started from the aspect of okay, we were looking from the outside in. A lot of people believe a startup just can't possibly build a jet engine, and only these 3 companies can. And we were looking at the development program. We're like, the proof points in this development program are all at the back. We're going to go design this thing, and iterate and design and iterate and design and iterate and design, and then poof, 5 years from now, an engine shows up at a test stand, and then everyone will be like, "Oh, it worked." And as I started to look at that, I'm like, "Wait a minute, why is that even the right development plan?"
Mhm.
Like we started asking it from like, how do we get proof points? But what I started to realize was like, we're developing this jet engine the way Rolls-Royce would develop the jet engine, not the way a startup would develop a jet engine. And I was like, how do we get to hardware quickly? How do we discover where we've made mistakes, discover them quickly, and like plan to fix them, versus like wait all the way to the end of the program and then find out what we didn't do right. And Scott, to his like immense credit, basically said, "Okay, I'm on the next flight to Florida," which is where our engine team was. And he literally like flew out of Denver, went to Florida, and he came back middle of next week, and he's presenting at my staff meeting the new engine development plan, which has the core of the engine running in 18 months.
Nice.
And generating thrust, proving it all really
So
works.
instead of 5 years,
It went to
hoping
18,
they show up with something that works.
right,
It's like, we're going to get to that first iteration
in 18
in
months.
18 months.
In 18
which,
months.
at the pace that you're working on, that's fast.
That's fast, yeah. And so I'm sitting here listening to this and thinking, this is amazing. I'm like, okay, but like, what happened? Does the team really? Do you believe in this, Scott, or are you just doing what I asked for?
Yeah.
And more importantly, does your team believe in it, or are they just doing what the boss does? And he's like, well, when I got to Jupiter, Florida, where the team is, I said we wanted to revisit the plan. Like at first, the body language was like this.
Oh, yes.
And they're pushing back and defending the plan. And he's like, but by the time I left, we just workshopped it together. By the time I left, they said, would you please go back to Denver and get Blake to approve the new plan?
Good.
I was like, wow, okay, that's an example of
It's
great
much
leadership.
more interesting doing it the other way too. I mean, it's like, how quick can we get something out there and see what it does, as opposed to let's just look at engineering drawings
Right.
and designs and calculations.
By the way, it's never going to succeed that way. Like, and if you look at the what's gone on with jet engine development, all the big guys, which by the way, the whole last 20 years in this industry is a train wreck. Actually, I guess it's a plane crash, but it's and sadly, it's literal in some cases.
Yeah.
But the
deadly,
whole
unfortunately.
industry has completely forgotten how you develop and build new products. Like literally, the last year Boeing launched an all-new airplane was 2004. Since then, they've only tweaked existing products, and they've only failed to do so. And you see the same thing at the big engine companies. And part of what happened is all the bean counters took over. And so there's an engine that powers the latest iteration of the 777. That is basically been the long pole in the tent. If you look at the detail of what happened on that development program, the accountants came in and they found all this thing in the program called testing, and that they could save a lot of money by deleting it. And they're like, we've got really good engineering tools. We've been developing jet engines for 80 years. Like, we know how to do it by now. So like, why do we need 2 test engines when we could have 1 test engine? And so they basically deleted everything along the way in order to save money. And on day 1, that looks like a great plan because the schedule just got shorter and the budget just got smaller. But like, great, now it looks great on paper. But it turns out the engineering is never perfect. And delaying discovery of that guarantees that now everything will have been invested with the mindset of it's going to be perfect the first time, and then it's not, and then it's really expensive to fix.
Yep.
And it's a multi-billion-dollar kind of disaster. And so I think I've really come to believe is you're developing hardware. You invest in digital engineering, but you don't put all your eggs in the digital engineering basket. You actually co-mature the digital models together with real hardware, and you don't just iterate on the overall complete design of the airplane or of the engine, but you also iterate on it at every level. You test every component as you go, and then you get to a fully integrated system as quickly as you can, and you test the integration as quickly as you can, and you build your whole baseline plan around that not being perfect the first time.
So when do you think you're going to have a commercial plane with passengers who are paying for a flight?
5 years.
5 years.
Yeah. And so to do that,
That's pretty aggressive from where we are now. Probably seems like forever from when you started, but as we sit here in mid 2024.
I mean, so if I knew on day 1 what I knew today, we'd already have this. We sort of had to rediscover how to develop airplanes because the industry had forgotten. But to put it in a little bit of context, so earlier this year, we flew our test airplane for the first time. That's the XB1. It's sort of the 1/3 scale kind of prototype for the airliner. We flew it again a couple weeks ago. It went really well. We're going to fly it again in a couple weeks. So that the pace of that program is speeding way up. And then the last couple of learnings out of that are allowing us to go pencils down on the big airplane in about 6 weeks. And then
what does that mean, going pencils down on the big airplane in about 6 weeks?
It means, so in the industry, it's something called firm configuration. Well, what does that mean? It means we've decided all of the high level, big, important decisions about the airplane. And so, how long is it? How wide is it? What shape is it? How many engines of what type and where?
All right, well, let me just ask you a few questions there. So it'll be hard to describe those in a way that the audience can follow without talking about, okay, let's start with how many passengers?
So it's 64 passengers,
okay,
all premium.
All premium, and how many sit in one row?
Oh, the real answer is still a secret.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. So the answer that's out there now, so one of the things that makes this more efficient versus Concorde half a century ago is we've changed the fuselage.
And the Concorde a half century ago, what is the Concorde?
The Concorde it's really the only example of a passenger supersonic airliner.
Yeah.
It was established by a treaty in 1962 between the French and British governments. Flew for the first time in 1969, same year we put somebody on the moon. By the way, half a century later, can't go to the moon, can't fly supersonic. And there's a whole other little sub-story about why that I think we should come back to, because it's very much a story about the birth and death of entrepreneurship. But there's a Concourse, 100 seats, $20,000 ticket. And by the way, 100 not very comfortable seats.
And you $20,000 ticket by the dollars back then, or dollars now?
Adjusted for inflation today, but it's still too much.
Still too much.
Like even today, in most places, you can't find 100 people that want to drop 20 grand to go somewhere really fast. Yeah. So New York to London, which is the easiest route in the planet to make work for something like this, the airplane flew half empty on average. Mm-hmm. And so to make this work, the really interesting thing is we didn't have to invent any new technology. This is like existing materials, existing design techniques, existing engine architectures, existing avionics, Like we didn't invent anything. What we had to do is get the product right to make the economics work and to make the passenger experience work. So 64 seats. Why 64? Well, that's about how many you find on a Boeing or Airbus in business class on a long haul route. And so if you can fill those seats in business today as an airline and make money, you can do the same thing on our airplane and make money on the same route. And that makes it work not just on a couple of routes, it makes it work on hundreds of routes. So not just New York to London, but Miami to Madrid and Seattle to Tokyo and LA to Sydney. They're like literally about 600 routes where there's enough passenger traffic at the right kind of fare levels and enough time savings that it all is going to make sense. And so we've already sold about 10 times the overtures versus the Concords that are ever built. And so that's part of how we get to like a commercial viability.
Sold. Say that again. You've already sold.
There are two different ways to look at this. So there are only 14 Concords that ever entered service.
Okay.
And we've announced 130 orders and pre-orders.
So you're selling this already. People are buying it, and they've bought how many?
We've announced 130.
Okay, you've announced 130, so some number higher than 130
might be
you sold, but you've announced 130. The ones you announced to who? Who's buying them?
So United Airlines, Japan Airlines, American Airlines are the three that we've announced. And so United ordered.
But you didn't announce 130 with those three airlines.
Oh, well, those three add up to 130.
Oh, they do.
Yeah, So the way we talk about it, there's an order, which means a non-refundable deposit, or there's a pre-order, which means money hasn't changed hands yet. And United did 15 plus 35, meaning 15 on order with a deposit, 35 on pre-order. Okay. American did 20 plus 40, and Japan Airlines, you came in before we'd really locked the airplane specs in a meaningful way. They did a pre-order for 20.
Okay.
And so that adds up. Mm-hmm. And another way to look at this is the first 5 years of production are already sold.
Yep. And how much of the plane, because all those are commercial airlines, I imagine there's a few billionaires kind of looking to get between two places a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Is that a target market?
It is but for the first airplane in a smaller way than you'd probably think. So we've already sold a few like that. But The reason it's not a big market yet is one of the. So actually, let's go back and tell the origin story of Concorde here.
Okay.
So Concorde, joint venture between the British and French governments, and it was very much the intellectual twin of Apollo, in that this is not something that we did because it made any economic sense to do so in the way we did it. We did it to show up the Russians. So this is the Cold War, and the Soviets in the West were competing for who would look best in the eyes of the rest of the world, trying to get countries to align capitalist, not communist. And very ironically, so we did a bunch of communist-like things, like have a centrally run airplane development program or a centrally run rocket development program.
Funded by the government.
Right? Like, like the irony
that the
is just,
taxpayers didn't approve.
right? The irony is just insane. And so we had all the failures of communism in our Western airplane programs and our Western rocket programs. We built things that made no economic sense. But one of the political fallouts of this is it really became supersonic really became a competition between the U.S., Europe, and Soviet Russia, and the American competitor got canceled before Concorde ever entered service. And then, so at that time, it was not, I don't think it was like completely obvious how economically stillborn Concorde was going to be. And so we actually moved to block it. And one of the worst, most myopic regulations ever was a ban on supersonic flight over land in the US. Mm-hmm. So it means you can fly right up to the speed of sound, but not over land in the US. And
and do all countries have that restriction?
Basically, yes. US and Canada, it's very explicit. Europe, it's written differently, but it's interpreted to be the same thing. But the default assumption today is you can't fly supersonic over land. And that means, which means you can't fly much faster than a high-end business jet does. When a high-end business jet, I think the latest one flies 93.5% of the speed of sound. And a supersonic, like our airplane, will be able to fly 94%. And it's like half a percent's not worth it.
Right. Why is it that they don't want supersonic flying over land?
Well, the extensive reason is that sonic booms are really bad.
So sonic booms.
That's the claim. But why was it? If that was the real reason, wouldn't this have been a noise limit, not a speed limit?
Yeah.
And I wasn't there to hear Concorde.
And just when we talk about sonic booms, so that the listeners understand, when a plane is going faster than the speed of sound, as it passes areas, you're going to hear a boom.
A boom, yeah.
So different people hear at a different time, but you're going to hear it when it's through. It's
like the wake of a boat. So like a big boat generates a big wake. A little boat generates a little wake. And but the perspective of someone like standing in the water, when a boat goes by, the wake hits you. And the sonic boom has a lot of similarities to boat wake. So the smaller the boat, the smaller the wake. The further away the boat, the smaller the wake. And I don't know this because I was never there to hear Concorde, but my suspicion is that the reason it's not a noise limit is that because if it were any reasonable noise limit, Concorde would have passed.
Yeah.
And we had to make it a speed limit in order to actually block it. But that rule has hung around, and it basically led to the supersonic business jets not having any reasonable market. It's like, okay, you could make a supersonic business jet. We could have made one. But the pitch would be like, okay, here's an airplane that's 50% more expensive than a G6. It's half the size of a G6. And it's not any faster 80% of the time the way you actually fly your G6, which is mostly over land. And so at that point, there's no market except vanity, except for a small number of people who do a lot of international. So so it actually makes a lot more sense to start with a supersonic airliner that the Uniteds and Americans and Japan Airlines of the world can deploy on the routes that are mostly over water. And by the way, the comp is easier over land because a high-end business jet is about 20% faster than a Boeing or Airbus. And so Overture will be 20% faster than a Boeing or Airbus. So it's got a speed advantage over land, and then it's got 2 times speed advantage over water. So then if you run the math, like there's a gigantic market for that. We'll make about as many Overtures as there are Boeing 787s. And we don't need to change any regulations to make that happen. But if you play it out a next step, when you can buy a ticket for, let's say, $5,000 on United, and you can cross the Pacific in 4.5 hours, and your $100 million Gulfstream is actually slower, and also it takes longer to cross the continent than it takes to cross the Pacific. A lot of people are going to say none of this makes any sense. We got to remove the prohibition on supersonic flight over land and have a common sense noise limit instead.
How viable is that? I mean, is it?
I think it's going to be, if we're reasonable, I think it's going to be doable. And for a long time, that was an open question for me. But then I've spent a bunch of time in the Mojave Desert with the XB1, and sonic booms are commonplace down there. The military makes them all the time. And just like the wake of the boat, they differ in intensity. And there's some that'll, they'll get your attention. Like, we probably shouldn't do that. It's a little startling, but the vast majority sound like distant rolling thunder. And like when I came back to Colorado after having been in Mojave a bunch, I kept thinking I was hearing sonic booms. Like I'd be in the office and I'd hear something and think, oh, it's another boom. No, it's not. I'm in the middle of Denver. It's not a sonic boom. What was that? Oh, somebody dropped something in the office. And there's a thud. Okay, so if we can drop things in offices, we should be able to fly supersonic, at least, with reasonable constraints. Like probably day and night are not the same. And, you shouldn't fly supersonic 50 feet over the ground and make a really loud boom. If we fly supersonic 50 feet over the ground with an airliner, the boom is not the problem that day. Something else went horribly wrong.
And technology could play a role in muffling some of the sound too, right?
That's right. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to shape the airplane to kind of reduce it. They come at, the shape sonic boom stuff comes at the expense of efficiency. So it's important not to overdo it.
Yep.
If you say it has to be like perfectly quiet, then the airplane will be like so expensive that only billionaires can be able to afford to fly it. Okay. And a thing I really want is to make it possible for like essentially everybody to be able to fly supersonic. So it's important that we make it friendly enough to the people on the ground that we're not annoying. But also that we not overachieve on that. So we're being friendly to people at the ground on the other sense so they can afford to fly in the airplane.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go off on a tangent here. Who the hell are you to be trying to design and build the first supersonic commercial plane since, did you spend a previous life working at Boeing or who are you to be doing this?
I had about the resume for this that the Wright brothers had to invent the airplane to begin with. Like they were, there was a couple.
I don't know the resume, but there was never such thing as airplane before them, so it certainly wasn't building airplanes.
No, but the story of the Wright brothers is actually really inspiring. I mean, there were a couple of bicycle mechanics, and like all they did is sell. They made and sold bicycles, and they were not the favored team to do this. There were much bigger teams that were better funded, that like out of like the Smithsonian Institute that had, there were these teams that had like enormous amounts of capital. They're sort of charged with inventing the airplane and didn't figure it out. And these two guys from Ohio, just kind of scrapped their way through it. And so I'm also from Ohio, but I had my first career in tech. Yep. So I started at Amazon as a software engineer, and when I started at Boom, I had read one book on aerodynamics, and I had my private pilot's license, and like that was it. Like a thing I've come to believe.
And presumably, you had some money in your pocket from your
a little bit. Like I had enough to get us up to about 10 people, but before it was like I'm going to bankrupt the family. I got to raise outside capital, and I think if I hadn't had a little bit of capital, there's no way this could have gotten started. Because nobody would have believed in the like software guy from like Amazon and Groupon. That was going to go build supersonic jets without at least having built.
You had a little bit of credibility when you said Amazon, but Groupon was your other like.
Yeah, I sold a company to Groupon, and that was actually it was very insightful to work at Amazon and then work at Groupon and see the contrast.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did not have the resume for this. I mean, the companies said a lot of the same things about wanting to be long-term minded and but like one walked the walk and the other one didn't.
Yeah. And,
Groupon actually bore a lot of similarities to what went wrong at Boeing in that there was a lot of managing to the next quarter. Like went public prematurely and literally could not close the books competently. So the visionary founder CEO got fired. They brought in somebody who was about the next quarter. go back to the Boeing metaphor here, because I think this is a lot of what went wrong at Boeing. Like, this is a business where you have to think and act very long range, and managing to the next quarter is like trying to fly an airplane while only looking straight down. Like, it's just not going to go well.
Yep. Okay, so you got some Groupon experience, you've got some AWS experience, got a little bit of money in your pocket, and you decide you're going to go build. Is that what you decided to do out of the gate, or did you start with a different idea?
Well, it was like this. My first company that was sold to Groupon was a barcode scanning game. And so, like, if you make a list in the world of like the most important idea to the least important idea, like barcode scanning game probably goes right in there on the bottom. And yet, like, there's no such thing as an easy startup. Like, they're all hard. And like, I was running my personal red line.
Startups are pretty easy. It's successful startups that are
well, fair. If you just want to throw the towel in,
you just want to put an LLC together and you're a startup.
Right. But like, you actually want to succeed, that's really hard.
For sure.
And, and they're like constant near-death experiences. And so I would get up in the morning in my first company and just think, like, why did I get into this? Like, the juice is not worth the squeeze. This is an enormous amount of pain, and I just don't care enough about what we're building. It doesn't matter to the world. And so when we had a chance to, basically acqui-hire the company to Groupon and like get money back to investors, and everybody made a little return, I was like, okay, hallelujah. Like, I'm pulling the handles and punching out.
Yeah.
And live to found another day. But it left me with, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. But I never wanted to ask myself, is it worth it? Like, not on the worst, most painful day. I wanted to know it was worth it. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to look at all my ideas through the lens of how motivated will I be, and like forget everything else. And so for me, anything with an airplane, and it went to the top of the list because I loved flight like forever. I had this lifetime goal of flying supersonic since my mid-20s. And I sort of been wondering, like, why is nobody doing this? There's probably a good reason. It's probably a bad idea or impossible or something. So I thought I'll get 2 weeks into the research and I'll just get it out of my system. And I'll never be at the end of my life looking backwards thinking, like, what if I tried to build an airplane instead of an app? Like, I'll know why it was a bad idea. But what I found was that there was so much stale conventional wisdom that anybody with a spreadsheet and a web browser and half a brain could dispel quickly. And like in ways, this is like the most shocking truth about Boom. We didn't have to invent anything. Like, all the technology for supersonic flight was already out there. It just had to be put together, and the market's big, and no regulations need to change. So as discovering that, I was like, okay, I need to go to school on this. So I spent a year just getting educated before I hired my first employee.
Okay, so knowing then what you know now, any regrets?
A zillion. A zillion. Like, all the worst mistakes are always people mistakes. Building a team in an industry that has not had another startup for a century is really hard.
Yeah. And
getting people who will understand how to build airplanes, but also understand how to exist at a startup, like, that's been really challenging. And I think we're still cracking that nut. But like, that was probably the single most difficult thing. And there were other things that were strategy questions that I would handle differently with a do-over. Like XB1, we underestimated how difficult it was, and overspec'd the airplane. So the original requirements for XB1 were a bunch of things that were really hard to do, and that ended up making the entire airplane much more difficult than it needed to be. And so the big lesson learned out of XB1, which is that subscale prototype, was that we should make really pragmatic technology decisions for product one. And so we ended up like reducing the target speed of Overture a little bit. That allowed us to use existing material systems that made the engines a lot easier to design. We reduced the range that we needed it to fly. Like, we just made a lot of things to really put minimum viable product. But because we now, having done XB1, we understood where the hard spots were.
Okay.
Yeah. So the single biggest lesson learned was be more pragmatic.
But isn't that something you would only learn by doing? Maybe you could have learned a little quicker and stuff, but it sounded like you could have put yourself back there and said, boy, I should have figured all this out. Because, as you know, I've had a pretty successful run, and Still to this day, I obsess not over what
Yeah.
went right, but what went wrong. And
Right.
I guess it's hard to let some of that stuff go, even
It,
even
it,
even you know, even in my situation.
I mean, I think that's the hallmark of every good person I know feels that way.
Yeah.
Because it's we're always our own worst critics, and we're always looking to learn how we could have done better. A thing I've learned about learning is to challenge myself on, have I really really learned the lesson, or am I just operating with the benefit of 2020 hindsight? And to tell a story about that. One of the things that turned out to be hardest on XB1 was actually the landing gear. And like, who would have thought landing gear? That's not the part of the airplane that even flies. It's the part that drives. So like, I thought, okay, we'll just, a couple of wheels and, some struts, and like, that's a landing gear. It turns out landing gear is really, really hard. And probably the most, and the landing gear in this airplane was especially hard because we had targeted a design speed 10% faster than Concorde, which meant everything had to package up into a really tiny space. And so we had made the landing gear challenge like harder than we really needed to make it. And then we proceeded to hire a young, inexperienced go-getter team that didn't think to ever call anybody who had ever built a landing gear before and ask them for feedback. And so we get down path, and we ended up the first iteration of the landing gear. We just threw the whole thing away. We redid it. And I was talking with the engineering lead for the gear, and I who's a really amazing engineer. And I said, okay, so what are the lessons learned? If you could go back in time and whisper to yourself some wisdom, what would you whisper to your past self? And she said some things like, well, I wouldn't use those F-16 actuators. I'd use these other actuators, and da 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 da. I'm like, okay, well that all sounds like just the benefit of hindsight. Can you actually imagine your past self without any like new knowledge, but only new wisdom, doing something different? And she thought for a minute and said, no, actually, I can't see that. Okay, what that means is you haven't learned the lesson yet. Like I think you have to go back and imagine talking to your past self, and you don't get to say anything specific. You don't get to be like, not use this actuator, not that actuator. There's no way to know that. You can only generalities, only wisdom.
Coach. Yeah.
Yeah.
Coach on how you might approach what you're doing differently.
Exactly. And unless you can imagine your past self zigging instead of zagging, the lesson is not learned yet. And so I spun in a loop on that particular one until I felt like I could imagine myself doing something differently. And the principle I finally got was, beware of teams doing something the team has never done before. And which is okay to do. Innovation is going to involve a lot of that. But if you're in that situation, make sure the team calls somebody who's done it before for feedback.
Yep.
They don't have to listen to all the feedback, or they don't have to take all the feedback, but they do have to listen to it. And that's a principle that's now been paid forward. And we've made this thing called a non-advocate review, which is basically a third-party reviewer who is not a decision maker, but looks over a team's shoulders when they're doing something for the first time and tries to help them see around corners.
How do you find people to do that who genuinely are wanting to help you be successful? Do you have to pay them a whole bunch of money? Are these consultants?
This is the easiest thing to do. There are hard people problems. This is an easy people problem because what curmudgeon does not want supersonic passenger flight to exist? There are a handful of those curmudgeons.
There's a lot here in Boulder, I'm sure. Do you want me to put some on next door and have them line up?
Especially among technical people, they're by far the minority. And so it's not hard to find these people. They're generally lightly retired, and they are thrilled to come in and share what they've learned. And great people love mentoring, young, smart, eager to learn people.
Yeah.
And so it's that part has not been particularly hard. The hard part was just realizing how to know when we're in a circumstance where we need to dial a friend.
Okay, so you're sitting here now, you look back, wish you'd done some things differently.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever wish you wouldn't have, even like when you were studying it in that first year, do you wish you would have come to the conclusion that, hey, this is interesting, but I'm going to go I wish I would have concluded to go do something else instead.
I mean, this is just like, I can't believe I get to do this. Like, I am so lucky that I fell in love with supersonic flight at a time it's actually practical. And I can't believe I'm the person that somehow gets to do this. I sort of think that like somebody, far more capable of me than should have gotten to do it. But somehow I stumbled into it and no one else is doing it.
Mhm. And is anyone else doing it now? Do you have any kind of
I,
rivals who are out there trying to develop a commercial supersonic?
there's some people working on military hypersonic weapons
Oh,
where
sure.
there's the story is that they will take the bomb out and put the passenger in one day.
Mm,
And, and it's really, really smart team. So that maybe they'll pull it off, but I think that's harder than they realize.
yeah.
There's a history of fundamental technology looping between military and commercial. That happens all the time where it's like, something gets invented and maybe it's a new material and it's on a fighter jet and then the same material goes on an airliner later, but not literally the same product. The products tend to go in the other direction. Like the 707, which is the first really successful jetliner, became the KC-135. That's an aerial refueling tanker.
Mhm.
And the 767 airliner became another tanker. The 747 turned into Air Force One, and it turned into airborne command and control aircraft. So you have a lot of examples of commercial platforms being militarized. And I'm not aware of a
So
single
how many
example.
passengers again are you designing toward?
64.
So I'm assuming that there's probably the military is probably going to want to move about 64 people between different geographies very fast at times.
Oh yeah. For one, just think of the use cases where this can really matter. Like special forces. There are one of the reasons it's really hard to take out bad guys is because by the time that we figure out where they are, they've moved on to someplace else. And so being able to put special forces anywhere on the planet and half the time it takes today could actually change the outcome. Like there are a small number of situations like that really matter. Or
Or even diplomacy.
diplomacy, right? Like we were talking before we got on camera about like how much better this conversation is in person versus on Zoom.
Yeah.
Like, if you're Secretary Blinken and you're trying to rally support for Ukraine, you show up in person.
Yeah.
You don't phone it in. And so how many capitals can we visit in a day actually could matter.
Mhm.
Or in the happier version of it, like if we could get, first our leaders and ultimately really everybody to connect in person, we're going to diffuse a lot of conflict.
Yep.
It's like it's very, very hard to hate somebody you spend time with.
Mhm.
And I think that is when I think to the where do I want all this to be in 50 years? Getting the cost of supersonic flight down such that it's commonplace, it's the norm, such that our kids can grow up having broken bread on every continent, where they can have friends from other cultures that
Yeah.
they actually get to spend time with. Like that, I get very, very excited about because the second order effects are going to be so powerful.
Yeah. I've had the pleasure of traveling in the Middle East twice in the past year or so, and it's been great, but it takes so long to get there.
Mhm.
I mean, you pretty much have to carve out more than a day on each side of the trip just for trying to get from here to there. And
Right.
if you could make that shorter, the frequency of doing it would go up. There's no doubt about it.
100%.
And
And
the world will be closer.
the world become closer together. And there are really great case studies of this, but you have to look back to the dawn of the jet age, because that was the last time we had a mainstream speed up. Like Hawaii was not a tourist destination before jets. Nobody went.
Mhm.
Couldn't afford the time.
So where should I buy land, like right now, so that I could
Ooh.
take advantage of a run up in the value of the land because of boom?
I mean, that's a good question. Like, what are the really desirable places that are just too darn far?
Mm.
Connectivity between the U.S. and Australia and New Zealand. New Zealand might be a great answer to that.
Yeah. So let's talk about how long it gets from here to get from here to there.
Mhm.
So that maybe pick some of the.
Yeah.
Let's say I want to travel. And I know I can't go directly from here in Colorado to New Zealand since you brought it
Mhm.
up. What would it take me to get there today?
Mhm.
How do you envision
Yeah.
we'd get there using?
So let's take like L.A. Sydney as an example.
Mm.
Today that's 15 hours ish. It's really long, and even if you're flying in business class and you can sleep on the airplane, you can sleep a whole night, and then there's like another like whole day.
Yeah.
And on Overture it'll be 8.5 hours, which I'd still have to cut that in half again. But what that means is that the Pacific starts to look like the Atlantic, and
And would it be a direct flight? LA to,
it'd be direct with a refuel. So
Okay.
so the way you do LA Sydney is you stop in Tahiti for fuel, and that fuel stop, by the way, is included in the 8.5 hours. So you can stay in your seat the whole
How is
time. You don't have to change.
Tahiti? How's Tahiti? Because maybe I should buy some land in Tahiti.
Yeah, well, the art in Tahiti will be not letting the passengers get off
Ah,
because we want to keep the flight moving quickly. But yeah, Tahiti's probably another good example.
all
But
right.
heck,
Let's write
Hawaii.
that down. Land investment Tahiti.
But also Hawaii. Like you could leave the western half of the U.S. On a Friday afternoon and make sunset on the beach in Hawaii the same day.
Yeah, and let's say there's not a change to regulation. I agree with you. I think there will be relative
Mhm.
to the sonic booms. But if there's not, what you're saying is, hey, you still can get on a plane
Mhm.
in Colorado, take off, stay just below the sound barrier, and then speed up when
That's
you get
right.
over the ocean.
Yeah, you could do Denver, Honolulu.
Yeah,
Like that'd be a great route.
yeah.
Incidentally, that was the route the 777 was designed to. Denver,
Oh, really?
Honolulu. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So,
Speaking of, riffing off this on another little tangent, one of the things that I've gotten to learn is the industry was good at building airplanes through about the 1990s. And we were talking about, can we get great experienced people to come help us out? Like we were very fortunate to meet Phil Condit, who was, I think, the last good CEO of Boeing. It was really the father of the 777. And to get done with Overture in 5 years from where we are today, all we have to do is execute as well as Boeing did in the 1990s on the 777, which was
Mhm.
5 years from high level design is done to carrying passengers. And they delivered it to United, who was their launch customer, on the day they had promised it. And by
Mhm.
the way, it had all the parts installed. Like it worked. Um, and so like we just need to execute that well. And
Gotcha.
and Phil, Phil I got to meet during COVID and became a very good friend, and joined our board recently.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, he is.
What does he think about what you're doing?
Oh, he loves it. But
Yeah.
I think of the first conversation I had with Phil was some investors had basically found him and asked him to do some diligence on us. And so I get on the phone with Phil, and Phil's like, so okay, so actually to tell you his story a little bit to put this in
Yeah.
context, he started his
Did it start off
career.
the conversation with, so you were with Groupon? Can we go through this one more
Right.
time?
Yeah. So this was so Phil has started out as an aerodynamicist on Boeing's supersonic product that never came to market. And then he was chief engineer on the 757, and he was father of the 777. And then he ran the whole company through 2004, which coincidentally or not was the last year they introduced a new product.
Mhm.
And so Phil said, okay, Blake, if you're, why did Concorde fail? Why did the Boeing SST supersonic transport never come to market? Why is Boeing not doing what you're doing today? Like, why is any of your thing any different? Like, oh boy, okay. Like, and I was very, I felt a little intimidated because it's a big question from kind of one of my heroes. And I said, I don't know, Phil, but you live this, in a deep way. But I'll give you my perspective on it. And I gave him my perspective on it, which included in part that Boeing sells 3 class airplanes, first class, business class, economy, and or who's becoming business class, premium economy, economy. It's the same thing, but it got renamed. And it's not. And today you can't build a 3 class supersonic jet that would make economic sense in every class. But we can do it for first in business. But it would make no sense for Boeing to do that because it would cannibalize 777 sales versus expanding the market. And so it's an innovator's dilemma. And I said, I don't know, but you lived that. I didn't. What do you think? And he says, nope, that's exactly right. I'm the guy that made that decision, and that was my reason. And then he said,
before innovator's dilemma was a thing.
That's right. That's right.
maybe about that time.
But a startup doesn't have the
And so
cannibalization problem.
Innovator's dilemma, again, for listeners, means that companies who've been around for a while and have had success tend to have a disincentive to over innovate because they're trying to protect their market share, protect their position, and they sometimes, and this is a perfect example, sometimes have to take into account, boy, if I do this and it's successful, we might not be better off because we're going to cannibalize ourselves.
Right.
And therefore, you leave your flanks open for upstarts to come along and say, I don't have a market to protect. I don't have the constraints you have. I'm not going to lose that revenue if we're successful. You are. So they're able to move in ways, not just that they're more efficient or more effective, but also they don't have the disincentive barrier to innovating.
That's
So
right.
an innovator's dilemma is, I know I could do this, but I don't think I want to because it might hurt myself.
That's right. Nobody wants to mess up a sure big thing for an unsure little thing. But the problem is that the unsure little thing might be the next big thing.
Yep, and often is.
Yeah.
Often is. Okay, so let's go forward in time now, and start with kind of the big milestones. So let's start with the big milestone. I guess this is backwards in time, but just barely the big milestones you just achieved with getting the test flights. And those were supersonic.
For now, it'll change soon.
Okay, so take us through what you did and how that changes.
So let's just talk about the last like 12 months, because I think the last 12 months and the next 12 months are going to be like boom time.
There you go, boom time.
So we flew the XB1 supersonic demonstrator in March. Just flew it again, and by the end of the year, it'll
and
bust
what
the
is
sound
that?
barrier.
What is
so it's a 1/3 scale prototype for Overture. So this is the first ever supersonic jet developed outside of a government or military. And so it's got, it's smaller. It is human piloted, but it's got all the technology on it for the airliner. So it was the first time that outside of a government or military, anybody's brought it all together. And by the way, the hard part of building a supersonic jet is making it fly slow, not making it fly fast.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This thing could go supersonic if it like fell off a cliff. But a long, skinny airplane is a nightmare for takeoff and landing unless you get it exactly right. And so the first couple of flights were all about confirming low speed, and which in flight 1, I think we ended with one issue, which we confirmed we fixed on flight 2. Flight 2 had a really clean bill of health. So flight 3 will be much sooner relative to flight 2 than flight 2 was relative to flight 1. And if things go according to plan, we'll be supersonic before the end of the year. So we proved.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, like our schedule says something like Thanksgiving, and like I'm sure it won't be Thanksgiving because we'll find something that'll delay. That's what we have to find a really big problem not to have it happen this year. So we built and flown a supersonic jet, and pretty soon we'll fly it supersonic. I'm not worried about that. We also opened up a factory in North Carolina where we're going to be able to build these things by the dozen and then by the hundreds.
And how did you fund the factory in North Carolina?
Well, North Carolina funded it.
North Carolina funded it. So
yeah, we're bringing a whole bunch of jobs to North Carolina.
Yeah,
and we ran a competitive process to pick the best place, and North Carolina got really excited. The legislature got involved, the governor got involved, and the Greensboro airport had a very visionary airport CEO, which is it's not usually a thing you get to say. And they wanted to bring a big aerospace company to the airport. They'd already done all the site prep work. And so it's like, here's a perfect plot of land. Just tell us what you want us to build and we'll build it. And so we did. And that construction project finished in 17 months. We'd actually planned for it to take like twice as long. But it got done. And so the factory's ready. And we just
and what does done mean? What if we went there and visited? What would we see?
Yeah, you'd find a 200,000 square foot facility, right on the taxiway, like right next to the runway where the airplane took off for the first time. Now, the inside of the factory is not done yet, in part because the building got done so much faster than we thought it would be.
Yep.
But that'll change over the next 12 months. And then end of next year, our engine will be running on a test cell for the first time. So airplane check, factory check, engine about to be check. All the pieces are coming together here.
Gotcha. And what other big milestones between now and 5 years from now? Like how would you break down to year 3, year 4?
Yeah. So, the high level framework is we just need to be as competent as Boeing was in the 90s.
Yep.
Like we've got a high level design that works. And, and that's true literally as of like a few weeks ago.
Boeing just needs to be as competent as Boeing was in the 90s.
Well, yeah. It'd be really great if they could be as competent as they were in the 60s. But we would take 90s and then we'll challenge ourselves to go beyond that. But yeah, so what will happen is, so we'll break the sound barrier in XB1 this year. We'll run the engine at test till end of next year. We've already started building test parts for the full-scale airplane, so a lot more of that is going to happen. We're going to build and test as we go. The first full-scale airplane will roll off the line in about 27. So that's like a little over 3 years from now. We got a lot to do. And then 28 we'll fly it, and 29 we'll certify it to carry passengers.
Mm.
And that is,
Sounds so easy.
there is an enormous amount of work to do underneath that. But the thing that's the paradox of this is the lack of invention required to pull it off. Everyone assumes it has to be made out of like unobtainium. Nope. Existing materials, existing supply chain. In fact, the fuselage for Overture is getting made in Italy on the same production line that builds 787 fuselages for Boeing. Boeing actually already paid for the production line,
That's
and they
nice,
they pulled production back. So now there's a bunch of spare capacity. So we didn't have to invent anything. For the most part, we didn't need to tool up new supplier. Well, we needed new tooling, but we didn't need new suppliers. Like a lot of the industrial equipment that will build this airplane already exists. We just have to execute it and put it together. And so that means not making any big mistakes and making for darn sure that we're building the right product.
And where does the money come from to fund all this?
Well, you're funding all of it, right, Dan?
Am I? I'm funding a tiny bit. Yeah, Russo Ventures is an investor. We have been for about 3 years now.
That sounds about right. Yeah, no, you've been very kind to us. No, we've had a lot of great people who've been supporting us, and so we went through Y Combinator back in the day, and they've continued to support the company. Lorraine Jobs' family office led our B round. Our C round was Prime Movers Lab and Bessemer. We've also brought in some great strategics. Japan Airlines is an investor. American Express is an investor. And also our customers have made non-refundable deposits. Customer money is the best money. And we've gotten some big government grants. I think there would be more of that too. So it's partially investor money, customer money, government money, and the story, the overall financial story. On one hand, is in success, the size of the prize is very large. Like if we build 100 airplanes per year, $250 million a copy, like with any reasonable revenue multiple, this is a $100 billion plus company. The size of the prize is very large in success. And so we need to execute well, and we need to be capitally efficient. And now that we've actually done XP1, we can measure our capital efficiency, which is about 10 times better than the next similar program.
Gotcha.
It's like small, focused entrepreneurial teams can do things that the big guys can't do or won't do. Mm-hmm. And the aerospace industry has gotten like fat, dumb, and happy.
Yeah, no, there's not much innovation taking place in the airline industry, although they're being pressed now to do it.
They're starting to be. It's actually really really cool to see the like in the space side. There's been thanks to SpaceX, Blue Origin, and companies like Ursa. There's innovations picked back up, and like pretty soon we'll be able to go to the moon again. So we'll be back to, in a certain sense, we'll be back to where we were in 1969, but actually in a far, far, far healthier way, because we'll have done it in a sustainable way.
I mean, it just is baffling that we got to the moon in 1969 with the technology that is there, and you fast forward all these years later, and we're still not able to go back to the moon.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think people look at Apollo and Concorde, which were both in 1969, and at the time it was regarded as like marvelous technical accomplishment, and the space age is coming, the supersonic age is coming, and like neither of them really happened. And it's
happening now, though. I mean, you mentioned some of the bigger names, but if you look at Colorado alone, the amount of space activity that is going on here, startups, scale-ups, the big, divisions of the big defense companies who focus on space. I mean, it's up and down the Front Range from Colorado Springs. You mentioned Ursa Major; they're north of Boulder. Everywhere in between, there are companies doing crazy, interesting things relative to space. And Starlink, which I remember when I was running Zayo, visiting Starlink and kind of laughing at the idea that was a good idea. Now they're the ones laughing at me for not figuring out that they really were onto something. It's been transformational in the world. It's just crazy.
Really has been. Yeah. So I think I think the theme is the loss of commercially driven innovation in the 60s. and the rebirth of that recently. So if you do things
in that industry.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very, fortunately, it didn't happen in other industries. I think it would have been really scary. But yeah, in aviation, there was sort of a golden age of entrepreneurship that started in 1903 from the Wright brothers and went to about 1921 when Douglas Aircraft was founded, which was the last new commercial aircraft company founded by an entrepreneur. 1921, Douglas Aircraft. And then in the 1960s, all the founders left. Like they all retired. And the first jetliner was built by de Havilland while de Havilland still ran his company. And then everybody retired. And then the people who worked with the entrepreneurs continued for a while. And then they retired. And then the bean counters took over. And then we just completely lost our way. And now we've had that entrepreneurial rebirth on the space side, thanks to Elon and Jeff Bezos and others that have been inspired by them.
Elon especially, I mean, in SpaceX, I mean, for him to be able to build that up and just outmaneuver everyone has just shown what the art of possible really is in the hard tech world.
Yeah.
In fact, you're not even alone here in Colorado in building a brand new purpose-designed plane. There's Roddy up here in Boulder who is doing something different than what you guys are doing, but it also is building a plane that's never been built before from scratch by a bunch of entrepreneurs, and they're on a similar trajectory as you guys are.
Yeah,
awesome.
I mean, I think that's it's awesome, and I think the moment the first investor gets the first return from like one of Boom or Roddy, then all of a sudden it's going to be a lot easier to finance an airplane startup, and there are going to be a bunch of them.
Yep.
And that's one of the reasons that I feel a lot of responsibility to, not screw it up.
Yeah.
As if we screw it up, like it'll be the opposite impact. That it'll be harder to go start something like this, and we want to make it easier. And the rocket companies that exist, I don't think would have existed if it weren't for SpaceX kind of paving the way.
Oh, for certain.
I would not have started Boom if there wasn't just that example.
No, it'd been impossible. Maybe not impossible because Elon's told us it wasn't impossible for him to do it. But it was bold, and it was obviously he had earned a lot of money elsewhere, so he could do things with his own deep pockets that others couldn't do to get up and going. What I'm looking forward to more than anything when it comes to using the sky is driverless little plane shuttles that will bring you from this part of town to that part of town, and the whole Jetsons kind of thing. And I know there's activity going on around that. Different parts of the
Joby, Archer, a whole bunch of others.
Yeah.
There's a lot of activity there, and it's they've got some big challenges, but I think it's also going to work.
Yeah, for certain, and delivering product to people's houses, not using cars. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about fuel. So, what are you doing for fuel?
Yeah, so we can. We're taking an incredibly pragmatic approach on this. So we can run on regular old jet fuel, but we're actually optimized for sustainable fuel, which is the latest generations of which are basically electrochemical stacks off of captured CO2 and green electricity and water. That's all you need, and you can build actually ultra pure jet fuel that burns cleaner and more efficiently. And so we've designed the airplane and the engine to run on up to 100% sustainable fuel versus today's airplanes can only do 50-50. So there's a lot of work to be done to scale up the supply chain for sustainable fuel. But however fast that happens, we'll be able to decarbonize twice as quickly as anybody else.
Okay. But you don't require that in order to get this up and running.
You don't. And it goes back to one of the biggest lessons learned for me is pragmatism.
Yeah.
Like we could, I think one of the reasons, there's a lot of talk about hydrogen airplanes, and there are a bunch of reasons why it's hard, but one of them is there's a huge chicken and egg problem. Okay, let's say we want to fly from London to Paris on a hydrogen airplane. Okay, great. We go create a hydrogen source. We put in a hydrogen fueling system at London Heathrow. We fly to Paris. Oh, can't turn around. Got to put it in Paris too. Okay, great. Now we got it in Paris and London. That's actually still not good enough because what happens if there's bad weather and you have to divert and you land somewhere where there's no hydrogen yet? So you actually have to litter all the airports around any flight path with hydrogen before the route becomes practical. And this is doable, but it's just really hard. And I bet on top of that, there's a chicken and egg problem between the fuel and the airplane. And I want to live in a world where all flights are on sustainable fuel, but the fact that we can tank up with the regular stuff makes it infinitely easier to get to market.
And how much fuel will you burn getting from one place to another relative to
Yeah,
a commercial jet doing the same thing?
we'll burn more on a per seat mile basis. It's about a factor of 2 if you compare business class to business class. And so obviously we work really, really hard on fuel efficiency, and your second generation airplane will be better. Third generation airplane will be better than that. But economically, the way this works is, yes, it's more energy intensive. And it's important that we make sure we're fueling the airplane as sustainably as we can, as economically as we can. But also when you go faster, you can do twice as many flights with the same airplane and crew. And so energy, if you look at the pie chart of cost of operating an airplane, our fuel slice is a little bit bigger, and our crew and airplane slices are a little bit smaller because you can basically just sweat the asset harder when you fly faster.
Yeah, that's interesting because obviously pilots, it's not the distance you cover, it's the time that you're flying.
That's right.
And so if the flight time is lower, your pilots are less expensive.
That's right. Pilot, airplane, like you don't need as many airplanes, you don't need as many flight attendants, you don't even need as much food. You can't eat as much on a short flight as you do on a long flight.
Yeah.
So that the champagne bill gets better.
Yeah. And it is, when you were pointing out earlier on the long flights and you've got your sleep time, but then you have a lot of hours to fill. I mean, that drives me absolutely crazy sitting in a seat for that many hours. That's
right. That's the other thing. On a 3, 4, 5 hour flight, you don't need a flying bed. You have a much, much better bed on the ground. So let's talk about if we're going to go to Tokyo from Western US. Today, let's say we've got a Monday morning meeting in Tokyo. Well, the way that works, and I don't know if you've done this. I've done this too many times. You leave midday Saturday. 12 hours later, you get there. It's end of day Sunday, Japan time. Go to a hotel room, try to sleep. Next morning, alarm goes off. Go to the meeting, try not to sleep in the meeting, and then come back home. And you can't do it in less than 3 calendar days. And at least for me, shouldn't let me make any important decisions the rest of the week because I'm all messed up from the jet lag. Yeah. And with Supersonic, you actually you sleep at home on Saturday night, and then you catch a Sunday morning flight. So let's take San Francisco as an example. San Francisco, Tokyo will be about 6 hours on Overture. And so at 8 a.m. departure Sunday morning, arrives 6 hours later. It's 2:00 in the afternoon, San Francisco time. So we're awake, and it's 8 a.m. Monday morning in Tokyo. They're awake. Go to a meeting, do a whole day of meetings if you want, catch an overnight flight back in the U.S. 24 hours after we left, and there's no jet lag. And the beds are on the ground, not in the air. So actually, this is part of how you make the economics work. You don't need as much, claptrap around the passenger when the flight's much shorter.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let's talk about the Middle East region. I know Middle East from U.S. is a long ways, but Middle East to a lot of other areas is also long, but in a way that I think is more reachable with the help of your plane. So when you're sitting there having conversations with people in Saudi Arabia or people in the UAE, what do they see a plane designed like this to do for their economic development?
Yeah, well, I've as you know, I've spent a bunch of time over there, and there's stuff I can't announce yet. But I think when we make our first Middle Eastern airline announcement, it'll kick off a race, and then there'll be a bunch. But there are a lot of routes that make sense. It'll be almost 2 hours faster, Dubai, London, as an example. And there are a lot of people who get up at stupid o'clock in Dubai to make a morning meeting in London, and 2 hours more sleep is actually going to be really nice. Or Bangkok, Tokyo, even Sydney. There are a lot of destinations that make a lot of sense. Not all of them do, because there's some that have a big overland component that where they won't get as much of a speed up. But there are a bunch that have enough overwater that works.
What country or region do you think will benefit the most from supersonic travel from a commercial perspective?
Yeah. The really obvious is just anything transatlantic. So think eastern half of the U.S. to western half of Europe. That's the bread and
Yeah.
butter.
But is that really going to
the
transform economies the way it might in some areas? Like, but you know, you mentioned Australia, for example. Pretty much
yeah,
anything from Australia to somewhere else is largely over water.
yeah.
Uh,
I think both of those are going to be a big deal. Like if I think about transatlantic, imagine if I could leave New York in the morning, make a late afternoon meeting and a dinner in London, and then come back and tuck my kids into bed. Like that's pretty transformative. Today you can't do that in less than 2 days. But when I talk to the people in Australia or New Zealand, like they would do anything to cut travel time in half.
yeah.
They'd be like, "You can torture me, but it's like actually right now I get tortured for 15 hours. Can you just torture me for 8 hours instead?" That would be so much better.
I imagine Japan is probably a huge beneficiary of this as well, because
hmm
again, from Japan, you're going across the water to
Yeah,
get to most places you probably would want to go to. And this just shortens the time dramatically.
yeah. I mean, it's Tokyo is like really nicely positioned for a whole bunch of destinations, which is part of why Japan Airlines was actually our first pre-order
Yeah,
customer.
good point.
So from the entire West Coast, gets much better. There's a lot of Japanese tourism in Hawaii. That's going to get a lot easier. And then you can also go Southeast Asia. So like Hong Kong, Tokyo, that could be a shuttle. So as we talk with our Japan customer, we think there's going to be a lot of shorter routes that almost are like shuttles within Asia, and then they're going to be the supersonic trans-Pacific flights that'll kind of replace what we have today.
Yep. And Singapore probably
Yes,
becomes much more reachable to a lot of
yes,
destinations without it being such a
yes,
ordeal to get to and from.
that's right.
Yeah. So, yeah, when you think about the whole Asian kind of, most of the cities are on and close to the ocean. It's kind of like our East Coast, West Coast is
hmm
pretty much applies across the board there. So
Right,
this would be a big deal in that area.
big
The
deal.
Middle East, I'm trying to remember my Middle East geography, but Middle East, they'd probably be the ones who would want to change the regulations a bit, because going
Yeah,
from the Middle East to elsewhere, you probably are,
yeah.
needing to cover land for a good portion of it.
Well, I think you'll find that the supersonic overland starts with corridors, and it would not surprise me if there were an Arabian Peninsula supersonic corridor, and that will open up some routes
Mhm.
in a bigger way. And then, but the reality is, like, we're gonna go fly Overture, we're gonna go listen to the sonic boom, and we'll instantly have an opinion for ourselves on whether it's reasonable or not. And if it is, then I think lots of people will agree. It might actually not be reasonable in the first airplane.
Yeah.
It might be when you take a second swing at it, because we didn't actually try to shape the sonic boom in version 1. That's another example of just minimum viable product. Let's
Yep.
not take on something that we don't have to take on.
Yep.
But version 2, we absolutely will. And version 2, I think version 2 will actually be designed to do something like Vancouver to Miami nonstop. So it's actually much shorter range, which makes for a disproportionately smaller airplane. An airplane with the same number of seats, or maybe even more seats, that has half the range will be less than half the size. Because
Why is that?
so there are these super linear effects with adding range. So if I want to add range to the airplane, okay, now I need to put more fuel on the airplane. But now the fuel tank had to get bigger. So the wing had to get bigger. So now it's got more drag, and all of it's heavier. Now the engine needs to get bigger. That's heavier. All of that means I need even more fuel to carry all the other hardware. So then I got to put more fuel in the tank, and it spirals. And
So that's where the regional routes that you were talking about earlier in Asia would come into play if you could,
yeah,
you could solve a lot of that stuff.
that's right. But it also makes the smaller, shorter range airplane also makes sonic boom a lot easier. We were talking about the wake of the boat earlier. A smaller boat makes less wake.
Yeah.
And so if I've got a supersonic jet with half the range, and maybe a similar number of passengers, maybe even a few more passengers, it might be, let's just say, a third of the size, and therefore it's going to leave a lot smaller wake. And so I think it'll be easier to do an airplane that's designed to fly coast to coast quietly than it will be to make an intercontinental airplane that can also be quiet from a sonic boom perspective.
So in what you're doing, I imagine you've gotten to meet an awful lot of really interesting people. People who have money to throw around or have a big role, and you're dealing with something that is transformational. So any interactions that you can share with really interesting people?
I mean, that I can share is the hard part of that question.
Maybe not by name, but by examples, because I imagine there's very senior government officials, there's very high net worth
Yeah.
individuals and their families, and
I think the thing that surprised me most is that the airlines were far more approachable than I thought they would be. Like if you told me, on the day of founding, that we would have tens of billions of dollars in orders before we had ever flown even a prototype airplane, I would have rolled my eyes and laughed. It was like there's just no way that would happen, but it actually really did. And and I would give an enormous shout out to Scott Kirby at United for having been first to raise his hand and said, we're willing to put a deposit down and throw our brand in and help work with you to make this happen. And so one of my favorite Scott Kirby stories, it's actually an indirect story about leadership. And so after we did our United announcement, it hit way bigger than anybody ever dreamed it would be. Like basically every news media covered it. We were in every major print publication. We were on every morning news program, every evening news program, every cable TV channel. Like I saw the media list. It might as well just have been like the list of all media, period. It's like everybody covered it. And then the most surprising thing was that people already started calling United and saying, we want to switch to United because we want to be first to go supersonic.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like it had.
Wow.
This is why United bought billboards, and they played our video on all their flights. It was like people were switching to United for supersonic when they didn't even have supersonic yet. And so I got invited to give an internal like brown bag talk at United, and got into the Q&A, and people kept standing up and saying, well, Scott says that our goal is to make United the best airline ever. So how does this fit into that? Or like that was always the frame of the question was best airline ever. And I got to thinking about what a great leadership example that is. Because if you just said best airline, well, people can debate, is the bar very high? But if you said best airline ever, now our brain goes back to the Pan Ams and the TWAs and the golden age of flight when flying was special and passengers were cared for, and it wasn't the misery generating machine that commercial air travel can be, with the airports and blah 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 blah. And so I have in the last few years that Scott's been leading United, like as a frequent flyer, I can feel the difference.
Yeah.
Like the employees are happier a lot. I mean, they've still got more things to do, obviously, but they've made huge strides because he set the bar really high. And so I'm grateful to be working with United.
Well, the high bar is being set today by, I haven't been on Singapore Airlines, but I've been on, the airlines from UAE.
Mm-hmm.
Those are like it used to be. I mean, very, very high bars, just a really nice experience, great service.
Mm-hmm.
Modern facilities. I mean,
they've done a really nice job with this.
U.S. airlines, and you're like, man, who's paying attention to the quality of the whole experience? Mm-hmm. It's nice to hear United.
Yeah, I mean, these things can take a while to fully manifest.
Yeah,
and an airline is with a fleet that's supposed to last for decades. Like it can change relatively slowly. And so it requires kind of a big rudder input at the top to get the air carrier to turn, just like an aircraft carrier.
So back to the question about what really cool people you come across as a result of this. Again, you'll have to mention names, but any like what pops in your head, and how would you kind of give us a sketch of what that is?
I mean, I'm struggling with the stories that are tellable. The
How many of them have told you you're crazy and why are you doing this? It'll never work.
Less than you'd think, actually.
Yeah.
I had some of that in the early days. The gist of it usually was, when I tell people I was building supersonic jets, the first question was, "Are you crazy?" And it wasn't always asked out loud, but I could always tell that was actually the first question. But if I could convince them that the answer was like maybe, possibly no, Then the second question was always, how do I get involved and help? And I've just been, I've been really surprised how many people want to help. And, like an example of that, Scott at United is a great example of that. The aerospace supply chain is a surprising example of that. People could choose to look at us as a startup airframer and just see nothing but risk. And I've been surprised at how much of the best of the best suppliers to Boeing and Airbus want to throw in with us. And it's actually, I should explain why that's not as obvious. Like, you think of like, oh, suppliers, these are people you buy things from, so obviously they're going to want to take your money. But no, because the technology is all off the shelf, but the specific parts are not. The specific parts, Overture will have very, very few off the shelf parts. Almost everything will be a custom part, and which means every part has to be designed, has to be tooled up, it has to be QA'd, et cetera. And that requires engineering resources, it requires manufacturing resources, and that means it comes with opportunity cost. And so we have to convince suppliers to work with us, kind of the same way we'd convince investors to work with us. They're investing their own money, they're investing their very limited resources. And what surprised me was like, from at the top, the excitement to just kind of get behind it, and to be supporters, to be friends, to invest. And
to want to see you be successful.
Yeah, to want to
genuinely want to see you be successful.
Yeah, like
because it will be transformational for people in that industry. I mean, they're going to do something exciting, and not just in support of Boom, but like you said, if Boom does it, Friday does it, there'll be a lot that follow in the footsteps, and maybe that will spark a big golden age of innovation.
That's right. Actually, here's a great story that answers your question. FAA. So on day 0. Everybody told me that we would like regulatory approvals would be impossible, and regulators would just kill the business. And what surprised me is how not true that is if we just interact in a reasonable way. And so a few years ago, I guess I meet the head of the FAA, and I said, look, I know you're not thrilled with some of the big guys right now. We're new. And we get to have a new kind of relationship with our regulator. What would you ask us to do? And he said 2 things. He said, one, we're going to mandate a safety management system. Just get out ahead of that. Have a safety management system. And we said, that makes all the sense in the world. Why would we not do that? So we did. And then number 2 was the really insightful one. He said, come early, come often. Don't just show up at the end with your homework and ask us to grade it. Involve us as you go. We'll help you. We'll help you design in compliance. We'll look over your shoulder and we'll give you feedback while it's easy for you to take, not hard to take at the end. And then when we get to the finish line, we're going to be bought in. It's not going to be a problem. And so we took that approach in XB1, and we would invite FAA to come out frequently. We let them see the airplane while it was still getting built. And when it was time for the final inspection to get our airworthiness certificate, this is usually a process that takes 90 days. It's an experimental R&D airplane, so the bar is different than a passenger airliner, but usually it's not trivial. And so we let them inspect the airplane and the paperwork that goes with it, and they handed us the certificate the day we asked for it. And then they
Good to hear our government works,
right? And then they handed us the first ever authorization to fly a non-military airplane supersonic over land. And they did that before we'd even flown XB1 for the first time. Actually, they did it 5 a.m. on the day it flew for the first time. They didn't know we were going to fly that day. Heck, we didn't know we were going to fly that day because it was weather dependent.
Yeah.
And so the lesson I've taken from this is like, regulators are humans too, and they have an important job to do, which is to be the safeguard of safety. And but guess what? If we embrace transparency, if we include them as part of the team solving the problem for a mission that we all believe in, they're going to help us figure out how to get it done.
Plus, they want to see this too. I'm sure they would love to see supersonic commercial planes.
Of course they would. Yeah. Like this is the kind of, if you're part of the team that enabled a safe supersonic passenger airplane, you're going to tell your grandkids.
Yeah, you're doing something different than
That's
you're
right.
doing for the rest of your time.
And so there's going to be scrutiny, as as there should be. Safety of this thing matters.
Yeah.
But from the very top of the FAA down to the working level, like if we just talk to people, they want to help.
Yep. A lot of the Silicon Valley culture around the ultra wealthy, the ones who are billionaires many times over, a lot of them are getting up there in age a little bit. They've turned 50 or they're going to turn 50. They're staring at 60, and many of them, not all of them, many of them have as much ambition looking forward as they had that got them to where they are right now. And they start thinking about, okay, not just how many years do I have left, how many weeks do I have left, how many days do I have left. I mean, they calculate down to the minute. Here's how many minutes I have left in my life. And I don't want to waste too many of them doing stuff that isn't meaningful to kind of my destiny. I got to believe that when they think about supersonic travel, they think about time efficiency in ways that are hard to really have the same perspective if you didn't have the kind of not just wealth that they have, but the kind of desire to still have impact. And it's like, man, if I can bounce around different parts of the world without wasting so much time, I would do that more often. I would experience more things, and I would have a bigger legacy behind. I got to imagine that's got to be a market opportunity for you.
Oh, it is. And like many of those people have been investors and backers of the company. Reid Hoffman, Michael Moritz, the Collison brothers, one of the co-founders of Airbnb. Like we've been very fortunate to have some of the most inspiring people on the planet back us. And and I think it's exactly for the reasons you're saying. Like, for one, they all want the product. Like everybody wants the product. But also, here's a chance to prove that tech can do more than make an app.
Yeah.
That we can restart innovation in an industry that lost it.
Yep. And hard tech.
That's right.
Hardware tech, physical technology is something that I think there's been shying away from that for good reason. You can make a lot more money on a software app that takes off, but the revival of hard tech as being very real opportunities in so many different areas, I think is a big deal. NVIDIA is helping to show the way there.
They are. I mean, like a thing I really want to prove is you can make money in hard tech. And it might not happen as quickly. It will definitely require patience, because these things, an airplane takes longer to design than typical piece of software. But that doesn't mean the returns, are going to be bad. Like SpaceX was a fantastic investment.
I like the way you said it. Doesn't mean returns are going to be bad. We want returns to be great.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, the thing that I love about Boom, even where we are now, is in success, this is a multi-$100 billion outcome. In fact, it should actually be more than that, because just as we needed more jetliners and propeller airliners, because when flights are faster, people travel more, we're going to need more supersonic jets and subsonic jets. So by definition, this needs to be a bigger company than Boeing or Airbus. This will be market expanding, just the same way SpaceX and Starlink were market expanding. Just the same way, one of my favorite stories is Uber. What percentage of the black car market did Uber take in San Francisco when they launched? Dan, do you know the answer?
No.
Take a guess.
When they launched or when they got really going?
I don't know the exact time point, but before Uber X, the black car market.
I would say probably 40%.
Yeah. Most people guess something like that. The answer is 300%.
Oh yeah,
because it's demand stimulative.
Yeah,
and faster flights are going to be demand stimulative, because when you make something easier and more accessible,
I can't believe I got that so wrong. Can we cut that out of this recording and dub what I said? 400%, not 40.
Yeah. Oh, almost. I mean, I hear 5-10%. So I asked this question at a Boom all.
I think it was a trick question. You said what percent did they take? Not compared to like the new market. So, anyways,
but that's the point.
I know.
You have to think about the new market.
Yeah.
And the market for supersonic flight is not. You could think of it as
People travel more long distances.
It's not about speeding up the flights we already have. It's about the trips we would otherwise not take.
Exactly.
How often are you going to go to Hawaii when it's half the time?
Yeah, I won't go to Hawaii because it takes so long to get there. I'm like,
Right.
I go to Cabo, similar experience,
Hmm.
get there a lot easier. Why waste so much time sitting on an airplane? Yeah,
Right.
no, I think that's really a big deal.
Yeah, because
So,
in a certain sense, there's not really you can look at travel as like there's a market from like city X to city Y. But in reality, there's a market for experiences with a certain investment of time and money. And like what can I do over a weekend? Or if I'm gonna take a week vacation with my kids, what can I do?
mhm,
And what Supersonic does is greatly expand the possibilities at every time scale.
yep. So, how do I optimize, my life looking forward
Mhm.
in a way that you know
Yeah.
has kind of impact and influence? Oh, I know what I was going to ask. The obvious question: what are you doing in Colorado if you're doing this? Why Colorado? Is
Mhm.
Colorado a place that's conducive to doing something like this? What?
Yeah.
Why here?
So because it's so great to be here, it's a great place to build a team. That's the essence of the answer. Like I technically started in my basement in the San Francisco Bay Area, but it was like pretty obvious that that wasn't going to be the right place. Just too darn expensive. It'd be financially prohibitive, and moreover, aerospace is distributed in a way that most of tech is not. There's no Silicon Valley of aerospace. There's Boeing up in Seattle. There's some military stuff in
Yeah,
LA.
there's
There's
a hell
Gulfstream
of a
in
lot going on
Savannah.
here in Colorado, though. Now, I
Yeah,
mean,
it is.
big
It's
company
growing quickly.
stuff, military,
That's
defense
right. So
stuff.
there was some already
Start,
here, but I also knew I would. No matter what, I was going to be relocating a lot of people, and so if I'm going to have to relocate a lot of people, because I believe in person, I need to put the company someplace where people are going to be happy to move
yep,
to. And who doesn't want to move to Colorado?
exactly, exactly. No, Colorado is, I think we've come such a long way. I started Zayo in 2007, and there's some presentations we're preparing for Denver Startup Week that, one of them is on the investor landscape that's on the ground here, capital formation. And so it got me thinking, what really exists in 2007?
Hmm.
How far we've come on capital formation, way beyond where most people have any idea, but how much further,
Hmm.
we can go
Yeah.
if we want to be right up there with anything else in there. So uh, to see the evolution, the pace
Hmm.
of evolution going on in
Hmm.
Colorado when it comes to not just the companies, the startups, the scale ups across so many different sectors, but the capital formation as well. It's
Right.
just incredible.
Yeah. It is. I don't. One of my dreams is we make Colorado the place where the most ambitious entrepreneurs come,
Yeah.
and we've got
Come and stay.
come and stay. We've got competition for that. Texas is giving us a good run for our
Yeah,
capital,
that
I guess.
0% tax rate gives them
But
that weather there sucks, by the way.
right, I'd
All
much.
you guys who are considering going to Texas, everyone in Texas that
Mhm.
can leaves there for 3 or 4 months out of the area. Where do they come? They come to Colorado.
Right, just come the other 9 months. It's great.
Yes.
All 12 months are good.
Yes. Come hang here.
Mhm.
Be with us. Well, let's wrap up. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be an investor in Boom. I'm excited to have watched your journey now for a few years. I am as anxious as most people, not as anxious as you, for you to actually get to your finish line so that I too can enjoy the product.
Mhm.
And it's just exciting to see what you're doing and the progress you've already made and the path forward that you've carved
Mhm.
out for yourself. And, glad to be
Mhm.
part of it.
Well, I appreciate your support, appreciate your friendship, and enjoyed the fun conversation. Wish we'd go another hour and a half.
Yes. Well, we will do that again in about, we'll let you make a little bit of progress over the next 6 months and maybe do a refresh and see where you're at.
Let's do it.
All right, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bear Roars featuring Blake Scholl. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Courtney Caruso with support from Allie Berman, Emily Notaro, and Gibson Seeger.